So the first thing I'm going to do is introduce you to the headdress. So I know that some Lulu cosplayers prefer to have their ears kind of separately attached, or they like tie them onto the wig. What I wanted to do for Star Guardian Lulu is I wanted to build a single piece that I could easily put on to my head and then also take it off for the purposes of transportation. One of the key design elements of this is that it had to be super light. So I was looking at making pretty much everything out of craft foam, no Worbla, nothing that was going to make it any more heavier than it should be. I think the heaviest thing on here is in fact the resin star. So let me see if I can kind of show you guys what it looks like on the underside. So what I started with is I started with a metal frame, some 16 gauge wire, and I basically created a wire that would go all the way around. And I created some little loops because I knew that I was going to have to hang the ears off of either end at some point. So I started with that. You may notice that there's some clips and there's a headband in there. I added those at the very end. So at this point, I'm looking just at the 16 gauge wire, kind of creating an arc over my head of including the bulk for the wig. So once I had the metal frame, the next part was to kind of tackle this primary gold piece here in the front. So basically this triangle along with the little pieces over here. So this, I basically played around with some paper until I got something that I felt worked. What this essentially is there's two triangles. So there's one triangle that's the very, very bottom base, and then there's a little triangle that kind of goes on top. And those are both made out of craft foam. And in essence, pretty much at this point, I'm going to try to get the patterns to you guys, but essentially it's you have craft foam and you're just kind of layering it and using hot glue to glue it on together. So we've got the base triangle, the next kind of secondary triangle. On top of that, we've got this strip. So the strip is actually made out of 3 pieces of craft foam. So there's kind of one thick one or one wider one that runs the full length of the arc. And then we've actually got 2 other pieces that form the edging. So that's one piece of craft foam on the bottom and then 2 thinner pieces of craft foam that kind of edge it so that we have this kind of groove effect going on here. So in essence, I built up these 5 pieces and then glued them onto the 16 gauge wire. To help cement it onto the gauge wire, what I actually did on the underside is I applied fabric. So it was basically the wire was sandwiched between a layer of fabric on the underneath and then the craft foam kind of lying on top. Because the next thing I needed to work on was the diamond piece kind of that runs kind of along the top here. So what I actually did for this one is, so this has a diamond piece and then like basically a little tab along the bottom. So the tab got glued on the underside of the craft foam piece that was already wrapped around the wire. And then what I did, let's see if I can flip this around here. Then the other thing that I did is I put some wire in the back to help support it. Because what I found is that with enough kind of trimming of the craft foam, I could get it to stick up at the angle that I wanted it to, but then when I put the resin star on top, it started to sag. So what I did is I just ran some additional wire, and I don't know if you guys can kind of see that, just ran some additional wire on the backside here to give it that little bit of extra support. So this wire actually runs from the base all the way up to halfway through these blue pieces. To get the structure, or to get the shape, I basically used craft foam. So each one of these is like a little piece of craft foam or 2 pieces that I glued together at an angle to build out this trim. So I just used some craft foam kind of glued together at the angles in order to create this beveled effect. And then we've got one more piece of craft foam kind of in the middle here, again, just to kind of create more of a groove texture, so it's not just these flat shapes. So at that point, I already had my resin star. So again, if you haven't seen that already, go check out my tutorial for how to build the resin star along with the kind of craft foam edges. I think the only difference here is that once I had the craft foam edges done, I also took some gemstones, some rhinestones, and glued them onto the edges so that when I painted it gold, it would look like it had been riveted on. So it looked, there was just a little bit more detail that I wanted to add there. So at this point, we have the basic triangle piece, we have the band, we have the top piece, the metal piece here. The last foam piece of this that I needed to add were the big, I don't know what they're called, but the big white things. And I'd seen these done a couple different ways before, where some people were making them 3D. They kind of looked, if any of you guys have seen kind of Chibi Usa from Sailor Moon, where she looks like she's got footballs on her head. I'd seen that done, and I really wanted mine to feel a little bit more like the Clamp aesthetic. For people who don't know what Clamp is a manga group. They produce series like Cardcaptor Sakura and Tsubasa Chronicles, where a lot of their aesthetic is kind of thin, feathery, very light sort of feel. So that was the approach that I took here. And what I did for the big white things, as it were, is I basically have 2 layers of white. And in the middle of the white, I actually have some wire running. There's a single piece of wire that kind of cuts out halfway through here. So we've got sandwich of 2 big kind of white foam pieces with a little bit of wire running in the middle. And then I've just got a third piece. Let me flip that around for you guys. I've got a third piece of gold kind of, again, adding into the middle. And so my white pieces are actually incredibly thin. Trying, again, to keep this as light as possible.